I'm Stephen Monteith, and I'm here to recommend some movies and TV shows to watch. Now, this is a very stressful time in our nation, the United States, and in the world. And I don't want to drive anyone away. Normally, this is just a feature for recommending forms of entertainment. But like I said in my podcast this last week, entertainment is about more than just amusing yourself or diverting yourself from the world around you. Sometimes it can help you actually come to terms with the world around you. Sometimes what you can learn from entertainment can help you deal with the world in a more, let's say, healthy way. The movies and TV shows I'm going to recommend right now are ones that deal with matters of race and with a side of immigration thrown in there as well. Something that I think is going to be very helpful if people take the messages of these movies and shows to heart. Now, a couple of them I've already recommended on my podcast. I recommended Just Mercy earlier this year. It's the movie based on a true story about a lawyer, Brian Stevenson, who's played in the movie by Michael B. Jordan, who sets up an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. In the movie, it mostly focuses on his efforts to clear the name of Walter McMillian, who's played by Jamie Foxx, who is wrongfully convicted and sentenced to die. When he meets Walter for the first time, Walter is on death row for a crime that he didn't commit. And the movie focuses mainly on Brian Stevenson's efforts to get the conviction overturned and the systemic racial barriers that are in his way. Like I said, I recommended that earlier this year. I also recommended Twilight Zone on CBS All Access. The showrunner, of course, is Jordan Peele, writer and director of 2017's Get Out. A few of the episodes in Twilight Zone try to highlight the struggles that blacks and immigrants face here in America. One in particular is about a black woman whose son gets killed by a racist cop in the South. And she has a device, a camcorder, that lets her go back in time and change events. Not like 100 years back in time, but back during, the day to change events. And she keeps trying to go back to save her son's life. But every step that she takes, everything that she does to try and do things differently, the cops still ends up killing her son, and she keeps having to go back and trying to change it over again. This, it highlights how you can say over and over again to somebody, if you just follow the rules, you'll be okay. If you just do this, you'll be okay. If you just, get along, then you'll be okay. But how that's not really true. How sometimes, no matter what you do, no matter how much you try to get along, it's just not going to be okay. So that's a pretty powerful episode, and like I say, there are others that you can watch as well. It's but like I said, I already recommended those on my podcast earlier this year. I'm gonna recommend a few new ones now. First is Remember the Titans on Disney Plus. Now, this movie came out about 20 years ago. Denzel Washington plays a black football coach in 1971 Virginia, and he is trying to be the head coach of this integrated school where black kids and white kids are trying to play football together, and it's sort of loosely based on a true story, but it has a lot of really powerful moments in it, like when he takes the team to Gettysburg and he talks to them about the Battle of Gettysburg that had been fought over a century earlier, and about how they're still fighting the same fight that all those people fought and died for so long ago. But there's one scene in there that I think is just as powerful in its own way. It's when two of the football players, Gary Bertier, white football player, and Julius Campbell, black football player, are arguing with each other about how they should be playing. Gary's the captain of the team, and he's just trying to get Julius to play along with the others, telling them that he has potential, but that he's not trying to play with the team. And then Julius comes back at him with, "If I'm supposed to wear myself out for the team? What team?" He tells Gary that none of the white players are looking out for the black players, and that as team captain, Gary's had the responsibility to try and get them in line, to try and be a leader, to try and tell them, oh, you're supposed to be looking out for each other, you're all on the same team. And Julius tells him that as long as that's the attitude, as long as that's how, even white people who don't think that they have a problem with black people are acting, as long as they're not going to stand up and, try and get other white people to help out, then what good does it do for black people to play along with the team? It really throws a new light on how things are going today, I think, with all the struggles that are going on, and with all the people who are still sitting on the sidelines, or who are on the team and are telling black people to play along, but they're not telling other white people to play along. And it highlights how things get better in the movie when white people start sticking up for black people. You know, not in a white savior kind of way, but in a, you know, I've, you know, been woken up to things that I've been doing wrong, and I need to stop that kind of way. The next one that I'm going to recommend is Selma. Now, this is available on Amazon Prime. It's by Ava DuVernay. She created the miniseries on Netflix about the Central Park Five. She's in this movie. She tells the story of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And his efforts to organize a march from Selma to Montgomery, the capital of Alabama, and about his efforts to get the Voting Rights Act passed. The movie starts off with him accepting the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, but it shows us that his struggles have only just begun, because when he goes to Selma to try and organize these marches for the voting rights, there are still so many obstacles that are in the way that even though there isn't a law anymore that says black people can't vote, there are still 100 little laws and regulations and discretions that can be used against them to keep them from voting ever. And the whole movie becomes an example of how systemic racism exists and needs to be dismantled, because you don't need a law that says as black people can't vote if you've got 100 other laws that you can use to simply keep them from voting. That's an example of the work that needed to be done then and still needs to be done now, half a century later. The last one I'm going to recommend right now is a documentary called I Am Not Your Negro. Well, this is available on Amazon Prime as well. This is a documentary that came out just a few years ago, actually. It's based on the writings of James Baldwin. He was a prominent black author and public figure in many ways, who was trying to write a book about three major figures during the civil rights movement: Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, who each of whom were assassinated. And he and James Baldwin was writing a book about them, but the book was never finished before he himself died. But the documentary takes his notes and his writings, and Samuel L. Jackson, you may not recognize his voice right away because he's speaking as James Baldwin. He's the narrator of this documentary, reading from James Baldwin's notes as James Baldwin himself. And he's painting a picture of how not just the system but the culture has affected African Americans, blacks in America, particularly how popular entertainment has affected them. Talks about experiences that he had growing up watching movies and how movies would portray blacks and their relationships with whites in America, about the kind of roles that they would get, about the kind of barriers set up around those roles, about the actors who played those roles. There's a lot of footage of James Baldwin himself on talk shows and giving speeches and in roundtable discussions, and it's interspersed with footage of events in our present day that highlight how, even though he's describing events in the 60s and before, that they're still not only relevant today, but they could very well have been descriptions of today. It talks about how movies, among other things, about how movies teach people to see black and white Americans. It talks about how, which at the very least should make it easier for some people to understand the enormous importance of having more movies directed by and starring black Americans like Ava DuVernay and like Jordan Peele, about how having those kinds of voices and their perspectives up on the screen can open all of our eyes, can improve all of our perspectives, because it's not just the system that tells us how we can treat blacks in America. It's the movies and the national conversation that tells us how we should treat them. So, those are the movies that I'm recommending today, and TV shows. They're all available for free, depending on whether or not you're subscribed to Amazon Prime, CBS All Access, Disney Plus, Netflix. You can watch them. I recommend watching them more than once and keeping your mind open as much as possible. And ask yourself this: even though a lot of these are set in the past, some of them are set much closer to the present, but even though a lot of these are set in the past, just how far in the past are they set? Because it was not that long ago that these events took place. I hadn't been born yet, but there are plenty of people still living who were alive and were adults even during these events. And the memory of them is still, I'm certain, fresh in a lot of hearts. So try to keep your heart open when you watch. Thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to my podcast this week, Stephen Talks. I'll be doing an episode tomorrow about the riots and about the protests and about my thoughts on them. And then there will be an entertainment themed episode on Thursday. That's going to be if you've been following my podcast along for the last few months, but I'll tell you that's how things are going to be in my podcast. Tuesdays are going to be world events related ones, news related ones, politics related episodes, that sort of thing. And Thursdays are going to be entertainment related ones. So that's when you can tune in to those. All right. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you more later this week.